Hi, thanks for joining Growing E-commerce. I'm your host, Mike Ryan. I'm head of e-commerce insights at Smarter E-commerce. And today we're going to dig in and look through a series of updates from Q2 and a couple things popping up at time of recording here in early Q3. We'll talk about everything from Pinterest's partnership with PMax to Amazon making its own Temu lookalike, what's going on with ads at Netflix these days, and a lot more. Just sort of a lightning round. I've done this before where I talk about two or three news items. I think actually I've got a few more this time. So a bit ambitious by this show standards, and I hope you'll enjoy it. All right, let's get into it. So I feel like Q2 it felt to me like it lasted somehow longer than Q1 did. It felt to me somehow a bit more eventful, and there was a lot of headlines in there. So just want to talk through some of what's been going on lately. Let's start off with Amazon first. I mean, at time of recording, we just had Prime Day. I don't know really the numbers yet. You will know by the time you're hearing this, you'll know more about how big it was and stuff like that. Right now, there's sort of a generic statement from Amazon. It's our biggest Prime Day ever. Well, of course, it always is. This is to me one of those kind of meaningless statements like, maybe the wrong KPI, like Apple saying it's our thinnest iPad ever over and over again, quarter after quarter, or release after release, I should say. So that doesn't tell me a lot because it could well be their biggest Prime Day ever and not have been much of a success. What I'm hearing so far in chatter is that it seems like it was a little flat or not that much of an increment over Prime Day 2023, and that there was stiff competition from Amazon's own brands. There was also a big advertising, like an outage on the ad portal on day one. So it seems like it was a bumpy ride, but we'll find out more. What I want to talk to you about quickly, though, is the T word. We haven't talked about Temu in a while, but Amazon and this new offering, they're going to be having this like direct from China offering that kind of copycats what Temu does. And there's been a lot of interesting reportage over the past months and in Q2, like actually how similar Amazon and Temu and Shein really are, that there's a lot of overlap between their sellers. And so people like me who are like, I would never buy from Temu, but then I'm actually turning around and buying from the same sellers on Amazon and just kind of giving myself a false sense of righteousness when actually I just paid more for the same supply chain, for the same everything bad that goes on with those sellers. And we know for a long time the share of Chinese sellers on Amazon has been rising and rising, and in many ways Amazon made Temu possible by gradually kind of acclimating Western consumers to the standard of quality that you get on Temu, and making just kind of exaggerating that rush to like the lowest price, the bottom price, and quality doesn't matter that much if I can just get a cheaper brand. I don't care if I can just get it at the right price. But there's a really interesting piece, and I'll share my screen for a second here actually to show you something. There's a really interesting piece though from Joe from Marketplace Pulse. I really recommend Marketplace Pulse, all their reports, all their articles, and Joe just does great work over there. But he talks about how like Amazon wants to be like Temu, Temu wants to be like Amazon. To me, it reminds me a little bit of, I don't know, Batman and Joker. And you can guess which one is the Joker. But it reminds me of that relationship between Batman and the Joker where they kind of like hate each other and are opposites yet are the same and they need each other. There's this like yin and yang kind of relationship there. I'm sharing a graphic here and I'll describe it to people listening into the podcast, which is most of you anyway. But, Joe from Marketplace Pulse, he just made a simple 4-box model where he has like the delivery speed on the vertical axis from slow to fast, and then he's got the selection size on the horizontal axis from small to large. And Amazon, and a logic like that, Amazon traditionally was really maximally located in the upper right hand corner with the most like the fastest speed possible. Traditionally it was always 2 days, but in a lot of markets and with products that have gotten down to next day or same day, it's just crazy. They're getting faster and faster. And of course, their they almost invented, or they first saw the potential of the digital shelf, this kind of unbounded virtual space where you can stock as many products as possible. And that's closely related, that kind of drive to just increase the assortment, increase the breadth and the depth further and further. That's one reason why they started sourcing so heavily from China, because they could fulfill that kind of that dimension of growth. And so in the end, that's just where they've traditionally been located. And Temu, on the other hand, also has that very broad and deep assortment from China, but they've taken this other approach, like, okay, let's not compete on speed, let's compete on pricing. And people think Amazon's cheap. No, Amazon's not cheap, not anymore. They don't even know what cheap means anymore. We'll show them that. And so they've used this kind of loophole where they end up just, how does it work? They like export to Mexico, then re-import back to the US or something, so that they can use this loophole to maximize this model. And you wait a couple of weeks, but you get things so dirt cheap. So now Amazon is offering a service. They'll basically have that similar Temu model, and it's not going to be as big as at first. They will, but they'll have a section or an offering in Amazon where you can accept a longer shipping time, and you'll get that rock bottom price. And in the first place, it's going to be smaller, and maybe I don't know what their ambitions are and how, in terms of how big they want to get it, and to what extent that cannibalizes their own business and pisses off brands who are sellers on their main marketplace. But there could be advantages to being a bit more buzzword like curated, if that's actually the sense of the smaller assortment, because if you can kind of get that value proposition of very low costs, where you're in cases where you don't care how long it takes, but you've got kind of the trust relationship with Amazon. You trust the mediation, you trust that they're not going to share your personal data with an enemy state, or not enemy, but let's say a frenemy state. So I think it could work out really well for Amazon. I personally would feel way more comfortable taking up that offer from Amazon than I would for Temu. And there are products where I don't care when it comes. I just want rock bottom pricing. So it could work. Meanwhile, Temu is working on what they call like Temu Local, and they're working on beefing up kind of their U.S. fulfillment and their U.S. supply, and local in other markets too over time. So they both, they kind of want to be each other. There's this kind of Joker and Batman logic to it. And, I feel like I've seen this happen in other contexts where the value proposition just gets kind of diluted. Like, I don't know, Instagram seizing on Reels in response maybe to like pressure from TikTok or other competitors who in the short form content, and maybe they ripped off someone else with Reels. I can't remember, but also YouTube seeing like, okay, short form content, let's have YouTube shorts. And then like in the end, it's this kind of soupy thing that emerges where like Instagram used to be the photo and picture sharing app. And then they really like kind of fully mutated into short form video content, even though a lot of users didn't want that. That's not what they were using Instagram for. So we'll see how this evolves over time. It's certainly something that I'm watching, and I'm going to come back to Shein again later, but just this Temu Local thing, while I'm on my soapbox here, I mean, I don't know. I couldn't really sleep one night, and I looked into this whole situation in Cherry Valley, California. This is a little tangent, but I find it fascinating. And, sorry to the audio listeners because you won't be able to see this, but I'll describe it to you vividly. Okay. Like in the first image, Cherry Valley, California, there's like, some suburbia and some, a little bit of industrial zoned area as well. And then there's this area of just verdant green Californian hillsides, lush green hillsides, or like kind of a plain leading into the hills. That's in picture one on Google Maps. And then on image two, exhibit A and exhibit B, you can see this massive thing that got built there. And it's unbelievable, the scale. This is Shein's logistics center in California. And the thing's nearly visible from space. Like it's just crazy how big this is. And funny enough, to add a little context, like I guess the photos were taken at different times of year, but suddenly those lush green hillsides are like this withering brown and reddish and muddy colors, and it just looks like an absolute disaster there. I'm sure that's coincidental, but it seems fitting. But Temu will go in a direction like this too. That's why I mentioned that. And when you see things like Temu Local, and by the way, Shein doesn't build this factory. They're not the owner of that. They didn't build it. They just lease it. But they also lease at least one other property in the Midwest, very massive place. It's like the size of Area 51. These things, they're just huge. And we'll see more of that. We'll see more of these Chinese lessors coming in and are leasing these spaces. So the next thing I want to talk with you is about Netflix and their advertising. That's been big news ever since they first announced it. And then when they surprise announced Microsoft as their partner, it's kind of quite a coup for Microsoft, but things haven't been so rosy from there. They just had their earnings as of time of recording. It was quite recent. They just had their earnings statement, and things are actually really positive for the company in a lot of ways. They are profitable. They're just a big dog. They're by far kind of dominating the streaming space, despite all of the competition that's entered the market and then the way that's kind of then reconsolidating. Netflix is still Netflix in a lot of ways, and you still feel the benefit of the initiative there, where they crack down on password sharing worldwide, which helped stimulate after that bad flat quarter or negative quarter that they had in terms of subscriber growth. But they've already started preparing us that they won't be sharing subscriber growth in the future anymore. They're kind of backing away from that metric. They are going to stop publicizing that, and this means that investors are going to need other ways to kind of size the company and assess its growth. And I think one reason that Netflix does that is because they are reaching a certain maturity point, saturation point. I don't know what the right term is, but they could kind of squeeze the orange one more time with that password crackdown, but the growth will slow down again in terms of subscribers. And I don't think that they want to spook Wall Street again with something like that. And so this is why they're kind of trying to change the conversation before that happens. So if your subscriber base isn't growing, I mean, what is your next option for how you're going to grow or show growth? And I mean, I think the clearer answer there is monetization, and the way that they've pursued monetization, like everyone else. As Eric, sorry for, is that how I say his name? I don't know, but I see, I only read things. I don't watch a lot of videos about this stuff. But Eric, he says everything is an ad network. That's kind of his catchphrase, and that's the case with, yeah, it really is. Everything's an ad network, including Netflix. So let's just look at the numbers there for 1 second. The thing is that we can see that although Netflix is the big dog in terms of their overall subscriber base and their size and stuff like that, they're actually just a little fish when it comes to advertising. The big three are Hulu, YouTube, Amazon, and based on data from eMarketer, they're all around like 11, 12% of each of them, is like kind of the market. And Netflix is down there below nearly everyone, below, Peacock and Disney Plus, even below like Pluto TV and Tubi. They've got, I think it's 2.7% of kind of the market. So on the bright side, there's nowhere to go but up. But on the other side, I think they're really big challenges changing the way people think about them, reframing their whole business and what they offer. Because, Amazon is able to sell ads or serve ads to people who subscribe, which is kind of crazy. Like, when you think about it, but the subscription is Prime. It's not a Prime Video exclusive subscription where you'd have an expectation that you're not going to see ads necessarily. That's on top if you want to go ad free. So like they have a much broader proposition than just the streaming, and they're able to kind of, in that way, they have the leverage to monetize deeper. And yeah, YouTube has been advertising forever, basically, and there's so many ways of buying YouTube ads at this point. They keep even expanding that more and more. So I think the thing with Netflix is that they sort of at the outset position themselves as like premium inventory, sky high CPMs, but now they've really got to actually deliver tech, and they've got to go much more in kind of the scaled programmatic direction, and they've got to find a way to, yeah, like I don't know, personally, I really I have this mental model where like it's locked in my head that Netflix is ad free. I would be a little upset if suddenly I'd be forced to pay for some advanced package or whatever, but we're going to see what will happen there. They're really going to have to probably create new plans or find the right balance here. They'll have to do it carefully, because if they want to scale their impressions, then that means it's going to really change the way that users experience Netflix. And it could break sort of a unspoken promise or a mental way of thinking about Netflix, like the brand promise, whatever blah blah term you want to call it. Because that's the way it is. So I'm pretty worried about Netflix in that regard. I think it's just going to take time, and the question is, how are they going to bridge this on Wall Street between this is taking time to roll out and scale our ads, and that's on the order of at least another year, I guess, versus, hey, we're no longer even telling you what's going on with subscriber growth. It just leaves a lot of room for uncertainty, and we'll have to see how they bridge that. In the meanwhile, the day after their earnings report, they canned their VP of ad sales after around about a year or so. That was also a pretty clear sign, and they're certainly interested in moving fast here, and they'll change up their talent and who they've got as they need to in order to achieve that. So next up, I want to talk about Meta. And yeah, I guess there's an awful lot that we could say about Meta. I mean, I saw actually, who was this? I think it was like CMO of a brand called like Chubbies. I can't remember. I don't really know him that well, but he really illustrated the topic nicely. He had like two screenshots of headlines from modern retail about Meta ads within like the span of a quarter. I think it was even Q2 or within the first half of the year though. And one was like basically, hey, Meta's fully recovered from the ITT tracking, like, these tracking issues. One headline is super rosy, and it's saying, hey, basically Meta is fully recovered from Apple ATT and the iOS 14, all this whole tracking, and where they just lost so much of their measurement capability. It's like, you know what? They put in the work, they've turned the product around, and it's just working again. And then I don't know, a couple months later, more or less, there's another article saying that Meta seems completely broken and advertisers are losing all faith in it. And this is somehow like always the story with Meta. I don't know what it is about Meta in particular, or if it's just advertisers are constantly bullish or bearish. It seems like this sort of toxic relationship, like euphoria and dysphoria, whatever you want to call it. The highs are too high and the lows are too low. I don't know what of it is advertiser expectation and what of it is just the platform, and that it's like for a platform of this size that it seems buggy. So it's been a whirlwind, and with Timu's activity in there too. I'm not going to try not to say the T word too many times, but there will be at least one more time. It's just a wild time right now. But one thing I want to zoom in on quick about Meta, and we'll move on to the next one, is that they made a change to the way their existing customer budget cap works. So this is in regards to Advantage Plus shopping campaigns, and I think one thing that advertisers have really liked about that, it's a very fully automated campaign, which comes with lots of feelings usually. But what they've liked is that you can kind of just decide how much am I going to spend on existing customers compared to new customers. And what I get out of so many conversations these days is just right now, it is so hard to just find new customers and find them affordably. And that seems like it's a key priority of just about every CMO out there and every marketing team, just focus on new customers. So it's been really positive thing about Advantage Plus that they allow this. Now, it could be kind of a case of bungled communications, but they were rolling out in phases. They're rolling out notifications that the existing customer budget cap is gone. And it's not all doom and gloom. Like at first, some people had some very negative reactions, which I understand. I think it makes it much more of a PMax-like product where you don't know what you're getting anymore. It is, though, still possible to have this kind of control. It's just now it lives at a different level. It lives at the ad set level. You need to have different ad sets for existing versus new customers. So you can still manage that. I think it just somehow feels more like a workaround than a feature in a certain way. But on the other hand, you could argue that that's a more granular way of doing it, and people might appreciate that granularity. So I think it's going to take a little time till this rollout is completed and until advertisers have gotten used to it to see if it's still performing the way that they expect, if they like this change, if they don't like it. But again, that's something that I'm watching right now. We could say a whole lot more about Meta naturally, but I think there's a lot of people talking about Meta and many of them know the platform better than I do. So I leave it to them. But I want to tell you instead about a change at Pinterest. And this is interesting because if I'm not mistaken, like already last year, Pinterest said that they were looking at a partnership with Google Ads. And then they've kind of formalized this. And if I remember, in February of this year, where basically Pinterest, like everyone else, is becoming an ad network. What did we say earlier? Everything is an ad network. And that's hard for Pinterest to do in some other markets because they just don't really have the supply there. They don't have enough to set up a proper ad network with proper inventory. And they're kind of in their developing markets. So what they agreed with Google is that Google Ads will serve in the Pinterest app in those markets. And that's the way that they'll kind of like bootstrap or kickstart this whole ad network in these markets. So yeah, I mean, I had to look at that to see how this is playing out so far over the course of Q2. And what I found was that Google Ads did already start serving some impressions in low volumes in Q1, but this really stepped up in Q2. So it's definitely, it started to turn into a topic in Q2, and we'll see how it evolves through the year ahead. And if at some point, I have a question here, like, how does this partnership end? Does Pinterest kind of wean themselves off of Google Ads? Or are they going to have a permanent dependence on Google Ads in these markets? Or I don't know, maybe they decide to expand the relationship because they both like it. It's mutually beneficial. They could expand it even into like more core markets. It's going to be really interesting to see how it evolves. So in my opinion, where this gets interesting, there are a few campaign types from Google Ads that can serve ad placements. There's search campaigns, display campaigns, video campaigns, and performance max campaigns. But so far, I haven't detected signs that Google is serving on any of those except for PMax. I'll explain why that's interesting in a second. Maybe some of you have an idea about why. But in the first place, I see this, I found this activity in 9 markets. So that doesn't mean that that's all of the markets that Pinterest considers kind of developing or where they've partnered with Google, but it includes some Gulf markets like United Arab Emirates, Oman, let's say Middle Eastern markets, including Israel. There's also some Southeast Asian markets, like small ones like Hong Kong and Singapore, at least geographically small, economically large, Philippines, etc. So there's several markets at play here. So it's really interesting to just see where that's rolling out. And then the other thing that I'm seeing is that this is almost all serving on Android. And I'm not 100% sure about why that is. I do know that it's quite possible that these markets just have a higher share of Android, but the numbers are quite high in some cases. It's also the sample sizes aren't huge yet. So let's see about that. But in some cases, it's really like some accounts at the account level per advertiser, it's sometimes like 90 or 100% Android, which is interesting. But like, let's get back to PMax thing quick. This is what I think makes it so interesting because PMax placements are really intransparent. Like it is possible to see that this is happening. You can just basically do a report by placement, placement type, but you'll want to see the placement level of reporting, and then you'll look and see that there are Pinterest things in there. And then you can see which app store it is, so you know which version of like whether it's Android or Apple. But PMax doesn't tell you anything but impressions for these placements. It doesn't tell you CPM or costs, clicks, conversions, nothing. None of that's there. And so I think that becomes a little bit problematic because we know that this relationship is working for Pinterest. It's helping to bootstrap, or maybe that's the wrong word, but it's helping to kickstart these developing markets for them. That's definitely a win. And I would look out for that on their Q2 earnings once they make them public. We know that it's a win for Google because they must have some kind of financial relationship in here. And it's more impressions running through the Google network. So my question is it working for the advertisers? I don't know. There's no way of knowing because all we can see is the impression volume. And I think advertisers would be pretty happy to serve on Pinterest compared to some of the apps that PMax serves on. It's probably like on the more premium end, but I also think we deserve to know what it costs and if it performs, and it's this total experiment. It's this neat partnership between these two. And by the way, Bill Reddy is the CEO of Pinterest, and he used to be in charge of e-commerce ads or commerce ads, including shopping, smart shopping. PMax was probably on the roadmap under his development, under his tenure rather. So to me, it's like he just jumped in a time machine to scratch his own back because he built technology that is allowing like his current company to get a boost. Whether or not it helps advertisers, we just don't know. So anyway, that's Pinterest and PMax. That's that funny relationship. And I mean, I want to be positive about it. I think it is a cool placement. I think this is interesting to watch. But how can we know if it's like, imagine it starts expanding? We don't know if it's good or bad for advertisers. It just feels very one-sided. All right, I think I've just got one last theme for you today, or one last news item. Kind of a news flash or news rundown today. I've been enjoying it. And let's talk just specifically about Chinese e-commerce for a second. We already have a bit because it just feels unavoidable these days. But let's just talk about it in a little more detail. I want to talk just about the competition levels that we're seeing on Google Ads and Meta. And so basically how dominant are these advertisers on there, which is something we've looked at before a bit on this podcast, but give you an update. And I want to talk about Shein a little bit too, something new happening with Shein. So first things first, it's been really interesting. Like there's a metric that I like to follow, which is I call competitive prevalence. And basically I look at all of the advertising accounts that I have access to, and then I look at how the percentage of them, how many of them are facing account level competition from competitors like Temu, Shein, and also other big advertisers like Amazon, eBay. So what's interesting, Amazon has been like a force of nature since about here in Europe since about late 2018, Q4 2018. But they've actually in recent quarters started to show a little bit of downward trajectory. So it seems like I don't know if it's related to the activities of these Chinese e-commerce grabbing up some of that, or if there's stuff Google does on the back end, or if they're just spending a bit less. I'm not sure. But they've been a little bit less prevalent. And Temu also, like we had a Temu episode or a couple of Temu episodes. They peaked in Q4 of last year. You might remember they were really almost as visible as Amazon at that point. Then they came down a bit in Q1, and the Q2 update for you is it came down a little bit more. So like about 2/3 of advertisers are facing account level competition from Temu right now. So that's down a little bit, but they're not the only ones that I'm watching. I think it's been interesting really to see in particular what's going on with AliExpress, because we know from other statements from that company, they're very aware of this kind of competition from Temu, and that they got caught with their pants down a little bit too, and they look maybe it's not the most flattering comparison for them. So I think they're aware of how much Temu is spending on ads and having a fresh look at that themselves. So a couple things I observed over the course of Q2 was that they were rolling out new localized domains here in Europe. They have sometimes been advertising with those domains. And I think the idea is basically that they can increase like their click-through rate on their ads and stuff like that by having, like that .de or .pl or FR for France, whatever, all these different domains. So they've definitely done some localization, but also they're, competitively in the accounts of like 1 in 5 advertisers now about, and they're actually about as active from what I can tell as they're more active now rather than they were even in like Q4 last year. So they're definitely testing and trying to scale up. I'm not saying they're going to be the next Temu overnight, but I think we're going to be seeing more and more of them. And then another, I just want to quickly call out. There's one, I bet you haven't even heard of them. I bet you haven't. It's this little Singaporean company, or I don't know exactly how little they are really, but it's called Light in the Box. But one thing I've kind of respected about them, they've for years, just quarter after quarter, been super consistent in their presence and the amount that they're spending in these ad environments. And I'm seeing them finally, like they weren't like a Wish, like they just can't shot up like a rocket and disappear or something. But I'm seeing them kind of finally show some softness or weakening. So I think that's the little Temu that couldn't probably. And then let's just jump over to Meta really quick. Man, it's been crazy in Meta. I think the last time that I talked about this, Temu had massively scaled up their Meta advertising on some days as high as 20,000 back in like April, 20,000 ads per day. And we get that data through the Meta ads library. And then they were coming down again, but they had their biggest month ever in May. So Q2 was really punishing. They were some days up around 25,000 daily ads again, and that was pretty sustained. It was a lot less spiky than last time. So their moving average was over 20,000 for a bit. Just unreal amount. And they dipped out again, but now at the start of Q3, looks like they're ramping up again. And that's in the US, by the way, those numbers. And I just want to mention, because, let me just say it the way it is. The Wall Street Journal had some terrible reporting about Temu. Probably in May. I'd have to look when that was. I have to fact check myself, but they were talking about like Temu staging a retreat from the US and being spooked by what happened to TikTok in the US and seeking solace in Europe. And the idea, if you're afraid of US lawmakers or regulators or whoever in the US, you'd have to be out of your mind to think that it would be better in Europe. That makes no sense at all. And it's also completely not what happens in the end. Like May was Temu's biggest advertising month ever in the US. And there's no signs of them slowing down. They're volatile. That's clear. They're volatile, but they're not slowing down there. And so then within days of that article, by the way, of the absurd idea that Temu would seek safe haven in Europe, of all places, Europe designated Temu as a VLOP, which to non-EU people stands for Very Large Online Platform. And that means you are subject to the very painful and strict additional on-top regulations of the Digital Services Act. So Temu has some fun times ahead in Europe. And I think they'll be seeking safe haven in the US. But one thing to mention, by the way, no one ever talks about this, but Temu is not only aggressive in Europe and the US, they've also made big pushes in South Korea and Japan. So they're also marketing to non-China and non-Chinese orbit Asian countries as well. So they're looking for growth where they can find it. That's for sure. So that was the news roundup today. If you like that format, let me know. You can leave a comment on YouTube or you can reach out to me on LinkedIn or something like that, because I love to know what helps you, what you like, what you don't like. It would really, you can help me help you if we just communicate a little bit. It feels sometimes really like a one-directional thing in a podcast. I sit in a room talking to myself like a crazy person, and I don't know if that's working, but I really appreciate you tuning in. I actually wanted to touch on some pretty bad feedback that the Privacy Sandbox has been getting across Q2. But I'll save that for another episode because we're out of time. So thanks very much for listening. If you enjoy this podcast, please recommend it to a friend, leave us a review wherever you're listening, share it on LinkedIn, Twitter, X, wherever you are. We really appreciate it. It helps. And Growing E-commerce is produced by Smarter E-commerce. So please check us out at smarter-ecommerce.com. Thank you, and I'll see you next time.